Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to week 3 of distance learning. Alrighty, guys. Well, we've gone through quite a bit here so far. We finished up with World War I. We got our test going. And now we're going to be jumping into the 1920s, the 1930s, and then we are going to be jumping into World War II. God willing, we should be able to get even a little bit further than that by the time we get to the end of this lovely and fantastic little semester. So, we're going to start today talking about the politics of the 1920s. Now, we're going to see some pretty big changes that are taking place because within the 1910s, there was a lot of change that had taken place. There were a lot of people that were living in cities. The concept of urbanization and industrialization had really changed the face of the American people. Okay, now as we get into the 1920s, when the war is over, now we get to start to reap some of the benefits of some of the amazing things that had been created during the 1910s. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff that came about. We're going to talk about Warren Harding, the president at the time, and how his politics kind of changed the face of the United States. And we're going to see some of the prosperity wasn't quite as true or beneficial as many people originally thought. Okay? Prosperity is always a great thing. However, sometimes you can have what's called a bubble. And when that bubble pops, then we start to see some pretty negative stuff happen all around it. Naturally, once a war ends, we see kind of a switch from a wartime economy to a peacetime economy. And sometimes that transition is really smooth, and sometimes it can be a little bit jarring. It really depends a lot on the leadership that you have as that change is taking place. So we've got this guy right here, President Harding. Now, he is trying to kind of calm the country down, okay? We're trying to transition back into peace because now that the war is done, we've got a whole different country to look at now, okay? Things are changing. Now, as is the case with many presidents, some of them come in and they're incredibly effective. They're well-spoken. They know what they're doing. They know how to get the economy back into a better position, and they know how to appeal to the people. Some of them, however, can be weak, okay? There's a lot of ways that a presidency can be weak. And so with Harding specifically, there was a lot of scandal that took place during this time, things that reflected very, very negatively on him, and then overall throughout history makes his presidency look, well, not so fantastic. So we're going to talk about a couple of those scandals today. After the ending of World War I, Harding finds himself in a precarious position. There's a lot of dissent within the United States, but also all across the world. So now he's got to not only stabilize the United States, but he's got to help to stabilize the rest of the world and make sure that everybody is essentially happy and that we're all getting along, and so that another world war doesn't start once again. Now, there's a couple of ways that he went about this. First and foremost, he wanted to try to come back to normalcy. He wanted to bring everything back to how it was before the war had taken place. Okay, and so he does this in a couple of ways. First, he wants to end the experimentation of progressivism. Okay, there was a lot of things that changed during the course of the 1910s. And a lot of it was very, very progressive and trying to bring, equal rights to everybody and trying to make sure that people were paid equally through unions, trying to make sure that everybody had kind of a chance at a good life in the United States. And now to say he wanted to end progressivism wasn't necessarily saying, oh, well, we're going to not give all these people an opportunity to live well, but he wasn't going to base a lot of his policy around it. One of the concepts of conservatism is kind of going based off of traditions and things that have worked in the past. And so he kind of looks to some of the older traditions in order to kind of make his presidency thrive. Now, the first thing that he does is he comes up with the Kellogg-Briand Pact. What this does is this wants to take away war as a national policy. So if something happens, it's not our first step just to go right into, aggressive negotiations or going into an actual war. So they want to have discussions. They want to have more of a diplomatic solution to things rather than jumping right into war. Okay, people wanted to disarm all of these different nations. They wanted everybody to kind of let cooler heads prevail rather than just jumping into a fight. Now, one of the things that had also been in place during this time was taxes. Now, what I mean by this is because, let's be honest, taxes had been around for quite a while, but there had been a lot of taxes on the rich. Okay, in many cases, the country looks to the rich in order to kind of pay up a little bit more because they can afford it so that they can give the country more revenue, put it towards more social programs. We see the argument really to this day still kind of going back and forth as to how much people who are exorbitantly wealthy should pay. Now, what we end up seeing is that they start to cut taxes from the higher echelon rich folks within the country. But what they decide to do instead of taxing the rich, they end up putting high tariffs in place. Okay, so a tariff is a tax that's paid on items that are traded. So the Fordney-McCumber tariff raises taxes on U.S. imports to 60%. So anything that is coming in from an outside source is now taxed up to that 60%. So it costs more for, let's say in this case, China, to send an iPhone over to the United States than it had been previously. Now, we also start to see some issues with reparations. So reparations are essentially payments that are made to a country after something happens. In this case, it's a war. All right, so there are reparations that need to be paid from Germany to Britain, to France, and to the United States. Now, the problem was, and it's only going to get worse, but after the Treaty of Versailles essentially forced the Germans to take full responsibility for the war, they now had to pay all of those reparations to the United States, Great Britain, and France. And so it made it really difficult for them to do that. Not only that, their economy was in the tank. And once the Great Depression hits, their money is going to be virtually worthless. So we start to see some issues. First of all, we have Germany having a hard time paying, but we also see Britain and France having a hard time paying the U.S. back for their portion of the war as well. So the United States has to figure out, how can everybody be paid off without really harming any of these countries? And so they come up with what's called the Dawes Plan. So essentially what they have is they have U.S. private investors. They lend their reparation money to Great Britain, to France, okay, and also into Germany. So essentially the United States is giving out loans. And eventually, those loans are going to have to be paid back. But for the time being, everybody is kind of getting their payments as they should. However, there's a lot of resentment all around because some folks are upset that one country can't pay. Some of the lenders, they want to get their investment back faster. So it's kind of created a little bit of a precarious situation for everybody. Now, if there's one thing that Harding is known for, as I said in the very beginning, scandal. Harding had an interesting group of friends. And as we've seen, going all the way back to President Andrew Jackson, when you get the office, you now have the opportunity to be able to bring in your friends, allow them to be your advisors or put them in positions of power. Problem is when you have friends that are, well, not very morally adept, they're going to take that power and they're going to use it for their personal gain. We already talked about the concept of that when we talked about some of the political machines that were taking place in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, and that was called graft. So we still see a lot of graft that is happening. Okay, so people using their power for their own benefit. So Harding's cabinet, okay, the cabinet are his advisors, the people that tell him what exactly he should do. Okay, so these people were not good people. They were known as the Ohio Gang. And so what they would do is they would try to utilize what they had in order to make them money. They also caused him a whole heck of a lot of embarrassment. So Harding has this whole big old group of people that's essentially totally taking advantage not only of their power, but also of his power, and they're getting rich off of it. So we're going to be looking at some of these different scandals, okay? Harding himself, he's one of those folks that was a little naive. He was not really in full understanding of all of the issues that were facing the nations. And so we've got his friends jumping in and taking advantage of that fact. So one of the big scandals that took place during this time period was the Teapot Dome scandal. So what happened in this case is that there were lands that were set aside specifically for the Navy. So all of the oil that was brought up there was to be used for the military, to make sure that ships were maintained, to make sure that any vehicles that they had the not only the oil to keep them running, but also the oil to power them, so creating gasoline. So what ends up happening is you've got the Interior Secretary, Albert B. Fall. He takes that land that is specifically set aside for the Navy, and he leases it out to private companies. Okay? So essentially what he does is he is selling this oil and making the money for himself. Okay? He had been taking bribes, and he was the first person that got caught throughout this whole thing. He certainly would not be the last. There were quite a few of his compatriots that were not being terribly honest throughout this time. Okay, he was convicted of a felony while in the cabinet. Now, this is one of those things, let's say if the president was actually involved in this, this is one of those things that is an impeachable offense. Okay, committing a crime while you're in office. Now, there wasn't any specific proof that Harding was actually specifically involved in this. So there was no need for an impeachment. But also, on top of that, one of the other reasons why there was no need for an impeachment was the fact that in August of 1923, he dies. And so from there, we get Calvin Coolidge assuming the presidency. And this, thankfully, helps to kind of restore some of the faith in the government. They get rid of all of these folks that was in his cabinet. Okay, these scandals now start to kind of fade away, and now they have an opportunity to go in and actually fix some things. All right, so with Coolidge, he comes in and he proposes his new economic policy, and the big thing with this is that he wants to have very minimal government interference in business. Okay, so that kind of brings us back to that concept of laissez-faire, letting the people do as they please. And ideally, that usually means that everything is going to go swimmingly and everybody's going to be happy. And in many cases, we saw just that. The automobile, the car. This becomes a new staple in American life. Okay. Ford had done an amazing job in creating the Model T and creating a car that was available for everybody. And now a bunch of other dealers or companies are coming out and doing the exact same thing. So because of cars, we now start to see paved roads. We see gas stations, motels. Okay, so if you guys have ever wondered what the difference was between a hotel and a motel, okay, a motel is a hotel that you can park right next to your room. We see shopping centers pop up as well. So overall, the big deal we see here is mobility. People can now move. They can get to their jobs faster, which again allows cities to spread further outwards and suburbs become more and more popular. And it makes the quality of life for people a whole heck of a lot better. So workers are living further away from their jobs. We see urban sprawl. And really overall, we see the auto industry become the economic base for a lot of cities. Michigan in particular, Detroit, okay, that city used to, and still for the most part used to really be known for their car factories and production, and most of the car companies had factories within Detroit. So by the time we get to the late 1920s, 1 in 5 Americans actually have a car, which is pretty impressive. The airplane industry starts to grow as well. We saw in 1904, that's when we saw the first airplane. So the first airplane, 1904, we saw them utilized in World War I. We saw them used as bombers. We saw them used to get recon, trying to figure out, what the enemy had. And then eventually we get to the airplane industry, which starts off really as mostly a mail service. Okay, so the U.S. Post Office takes full advantage of this, but eventually we start to see passenger planes pop up. Okay, 1927, Pan American Airways inaugurates transatlantic flights, meaning they were flying from the United States over to Europe. Okay, we see them used for weather forecasting. Okay, they carry radios, navigation tools. So we're starting to really get this new, very fast way to get from point A to point B, even faster than cars, even faster than trains. So the airline industry naturally becomes very popular, obviously all the way up to this day. The standard of living soars. So like I said before, with cars, you're allowed to be spread out a little bit further from the cities. And that, of course, means that these new cities and suburbs that are being planned with that in mind. It's much more pleasant. The air is fresher. Okay, there's wider open areas, parks, and so on. But also economically, things were going great. Okay, annual income rises over 35% from $522 to $705. Okay, we have electrical conveniences. Okay, so the AC current, okay, something that we still utilize here today. Now we can just take things, plug it into the wall, bing, bang, boom. Now we've got some cool stuff. So all of the stuff you guys are doing with your computers right now or utilizing your phones to charge that up, you are using this AC current. Okay, so it gives electricity to suburbs. By the end of the 20s, more homes have electrical appliances. Okay, so you guys can kind of see right down here. Here's a whole bunch of stuff that they have. Okay, so we have the electric range for cooking. Okay, you've got an iron. You got warming pads, light bulbs, waffle irons. So all of these new conveniences are making your home life a whole heck of a lot easier. Especially, at that point, women were still very much homebound in many cases. So a lot of the housework is easier, but it also helps for women that are working outside of the home because now they can go do their job, then they can come home, and they can still keep a very nice spick and span clean house for their husbands and for their children, and so everybody's all happy with that. So here's just a little bit of a closer look. Okay, so we've got all kinds of awesome and great little inventions that had come around during that time. Of course, with all this stuff around, we of course need to make sure that people are aware of it. And what do we do even to this day to make sure people go out and buy stuff? We use advertising. Okay, you guys see a lot of advertising throughout your day. If you guys are looking on Snapchat in between stories that you might be subscribing to, yeah, you're definitely going to see ads in between. Some of them actually force you to stick on that ad for about 5 or so seconds, depending on the advertisement. Some of them you can just skip right past. On YouTube, there's plenty of ads. Sometimes they're right at the beginning or at the end of your videos, and sometimes they have the mid-rolls for those videos that are like more than 10 minutes long. So advertising is absolutely everywhere. Advertising truly is the reason why television, radio, really entertainment in general, it's the reason why it's able to thrive as much as it does. Okay, because we don't necessarily, aside from paying for cable, we don't pay to watch anything on ABC, NBC, Cartoon Network, whatever. We don't pay for that, right? But in order for them to do that, they, of course, need to present these ads to us so that we can go out and buy stuff. So they get down to the point where they're actually using psychologists to go in and learn how people react to certain things. When you see an ad, like we can kind of see over here, this actually kind of goes into this a little bit, $49.90. Well, why not just say $50, right? Because it's right there. It's 10 cents away from being $50, because that 49 looks just a little bit more enticing. Oh, man, it's almost $50, but it's not. Okay, so it looks like you're actually saving a little bit more. Okay, we start to see brand names become familiar. Okay, and brand names, as we know, people will go nuts for anything that is branded. You guys look all over YouTube and Facebook and Snapchat and all that. You got all these people buying like crazy Gucci clothing, shoes, Louis Vuitton, where you could, like, let's say you can go over to Walmart, buy a Louis Vuitton, or not a Louis Vuitton, excuse me. You can go over to Walmart and you could purchase, just a regular purse that would hold everything that you could ever need for it for like, what, 10, 15 bucks, 20 bucks maybe at most. And then you go over to Louis Vuitton, something that's about half the size is going to cost somewhere around like $1,000. Okay? Brand names are incredibly popular. Okay? You guys see that with phones. You guys will see that really with anything throughout your lives. So luxury items are pushed as necessities. They're not just something that's nice. They're something you need. You gotta have it. Otherwise, you're just, you're kind of lame and boring and nobody cares. So something that we get with the 1920s is we get what's called a superficial prosperity. So everybody appeared to be happy. But if you kind of look down a couple of layers, it doesn't necessarily seem to really be the case. Okay? People seem to have a lot of money, but they really don't. Okay? During the 1920s, they're producing a lot of goods. Now, the problem is that eventually, if you produce so much and you can't sell what you have, that's a big issue. Okay, now most Americans want to be optimistic. They believe the prosperity will last forever. If there's anything that I personally have learned throughout my years, looking at the economy, investing in the stock market and all of that, nothing lasts forever. Okay, if we use just this past year as a look for that, okay, we've had some amazing numbers in the stock market. But then all of a sudden, COVID-19 hits. Boom. In 2 weeks, people lost years worth of progress. And now we don't know moving forward, is that going to be a temporary thing? Will we just jump right back to where we were after the fact? Or is it going to take years, once again, to build it back up to where it was? Okay, so you can never really truly know. Okay, so as productivity is increasing, businesses are expanding, We see mergers. We see these big companies for electrical equipment, for utilities, for steel, all kind of coming together. We see chain stores like Macy's and J.C. Penney's. We see McDonald's. Well, McDonald's comes a little bit later on, but the idea of those chains, they're starting to kind of make their way all across the country. National banks create different branches. We see an income gap between workers and managers. So now the rich, again, are going to remain really rich, while the poor, they're going to have a little bit harder time making money. Now, the big thing that's going to be hurting the American people is buying on credit. Buying on credit is going to be one of the big things that is going to lead us into the Great Depression. So the natural question after this is, well, wait a minute, if buying on credit is such a bad thing, why do we do it? And it's a fair question. When it comes down to credit, it's something that is very beneficial. It can be something that can be very tragic to you. As long as you know how to navigate it, you should be fine. So what does it mean to buy something on credit? Let's start there. That's the biggest thing. Essentially, it is buy now, pay later. So let's say that I go to buy a car. When I go to buy that car, I am going to see the price tag, and let's call it about $30,000. Cool. Do I have $30,000 that I'm going to be dropping on this car at that point in time? Nope, absolutely not. Okay, what I do have is I have about $3,000. So I'm going to take that $3,000. I'm going to give it to a bank. Okay, they're going to pay the rest of it, and I get to walk away with the car. So now what I have to do as a lender is now I have to pay monthly for that car until not only is the car paid off, but the amount of interest for that loan has to be paid off as well. So instead of paying $30,000, let's say now I'm paying about $37,000 because they've decided to put, X amount of a percentage on interest. This is how they make their money, okay, by that interest. This is why banks give you money to buy stuff. So what I just described here is an installment plan. So I pay X amount of money every single month for my goods until they are paid off completely. So interest is how the banks make their money. Now, the banks end up providing the money at low interest rates, which means more and more people are going to want to loan because they're not going to have to pay back as much at the end of the day. So installment buying becomes big, as we can see from the ad here, okay? So you've got this electric iron here that is $3.50. So if you just put 50 cents as a down payment, they're going to give it to you, and you just have to pay it off for the rest of the time, okay? So sounds pretty awesome. And so a lot of people are buying goods with money that isn't theirs. Not everybody has the ability to pay back their loans, and this is where we start running into trouble. Now, again, with that, guys, make sure that you're staying on top of your stuff. You guys are all doing really wonderful so far, those of you that are choosing to participate, so just keep that up. I'm really happy with the stuff that I am seeing. I hope everybody is doing well. I hope that we're enjoying, at least a little bit, the time that we get to be off, even though we're still kind of doing some work here. As you guys can see, I'm got the nice tall poof here. The lack of barbershops, it's starting to become apparent. So we'll see how that ends by the time we get to the end of our school year. But guys, really, I hope you guys are doing well, and stay on top of your stuff. I appreciate you all. Have an awesome day.